Michael Vecchione, episode 434. Mike, one of the OGs, author of Crooked Brooklyn, as well as Friends of the Family. And today we're going into Murder on the Bridge, which is pretty fucked up, if I can just use unintelligent language. I mean, the hand of the murderer, hand of the killer, that one was messed up. This one was brutal. This one was
absolutely
a little satanic almost. Not quite. How about you introduce yourself for all the new listeners, man?
Okay, well, for the new listeners, my name is Mike Vecchione, and I was the chief of the rackets division in the Brooklyn DA's office from about 2001 to when I retired in 2013. And before that, I was chief of the homicide bureau in the Brooklyn DA's office. And as you probably read now in the papers, it wasn't that way all through my time. There are a lot of murders in Brooklyn, or there were back when I was, the chief. And we were very busy. And I did 2 stints in the DA's office. I started out of law school and did about 7.5 years and went off on my own for a while, and then came back in 1992, I guess. I came back to the DA's office, and I came back with the idea that I was going to just simply try cases. That's what the DA wanted me for. He had established a new division in the office that was unique, where the crimes that occurred in particular precincts, police precincts, were handled by the same group of assistant DAs all the time. So they were all color-coded zones. So if it was in the red zone, there was a crime, well, then a particular set of DAs would handle it. And what that did was it got you to know the cops, it got you to know the detectives, and when I say you, I mean the ADAs. Got you to know the informants, got you to know the bad guys and bad girls, and it was a very successful operation. And I was brought back to be a trial attorney. I had tried my cases all my career, but before I got back to the office, I literally, within a month of me going back to the DA's office, I get a call from the DA, asked me to come back to talk to him, come in to talk to him, and it was actually his chief assistant, his number 2 person, who spoke to me. They said, we have a really very, very horrific murder case that the DA wants you to handle. It involved this young Hasidic Jewish girl. She was about 13 years old, and she was brutally murdered on a Sunday morning on the Williamsburg Bridge, which is a bridge that spans a portion of Brooklyn and a portion of Manhattan. And she lived on the Brooklyn side of the bridge. And she was walking as an exercise, part of her exercise routine, to the Manhattan side and then back. That was her routine. The case was, when I say horrific, Tom, it was really a bad situation, and it had been tried. It had been tried by a guy who was in the office before I got there, but they couldn't get a conviction. There was an issue with the juror, and the guy who tried the case was leaving the DA's office in Brooklyn. He was going to take a position in the Queens DA's office. So they needed somebody to try this case, and why it was important, not only because of the horror, the horrific aspects to the murder, but the Hasidic community in Brooklyn is a large community, and it votes. They vote en masse, and the DA wants to make sure that community was satisfied with what was going on with this particular case. So I got it. I walked into the DA's. They gave me all of the paperwork before I got there. And when I was sworn in as a DA, I went over to the courthouse, stood up in front of the judge who had the case and said, I now have it. I know that it was a mistrial. I'm going to try it again. We're going to try it again, and it's going to be me. And it was, and that's what I did. I got myself ready. And I would say within a couple of weeks from me starting at the DA's office, I was ready to go to trial. And when I started to prepare for it, or when I prepared for it, I should say, the first thing I did was I went to the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn, which I knew from being, a Brooklyn native. But I didn't hang out there. I wasn't intimately involved with the people in terms of the way that they lived, the stores, the way that the neighborhood was set up. So a detective investigator from the DA's office who was assigned to me for this trial drove me out there. And part of the reason for going was to get to know the neighborhood, but also to meet the young girl's dad, who was a cobbler, a shoe repair person. And what was so striking to me was that my grandfather from Italy was a cobbler. He opened up a store in Brooklyn that I worked in sometimes, shined shoes and helped them out and did things. So it was kind of hit home a little bit as to his employment. And I went into the store, introduced myself, and Tom, I was met with absolute silence. Nobody, he wouldn't even acknowledge me. He wouldn't look at me. He just, I didn't know what to do. I tried to engage him in conversation. I just wanted to let him know that, we were going to retry the case. We were going to, still be on it. And maybe he was angry because there was no conviction the first time the case was tried. I'm not sure why. Or maybe it was because that community is a very closed community and outsiders are not necessarily accepted very easily. But look, I did the best I could. I went in, I spoke to him. I told him what was up and how I was going to try the case. And I had to leave. I mean, there was nothing for me to do. Later on, however, I met a rabbi who was a big community organizer in that community, and he was instrumental in getting me basically into the community in terms of getting to talk to people and getting to know what was going on and getting to know this young woman. Her name was last name was Yagadayev, and
Zipporah Yagadayev.
And so I needed to know who Zipporah was, and I was able to speak to her teachers. I was able to speak to her friends, all through the auspices of this rabbi. So the next step was to go to the Williamsburg Bridge with the detectives and explore, basically find out what the crime scene was about. And I'll get to the facts in a second. I'll tell your listeners and watchers why I needed to do that. So we went to the bridge and we climbed all over it and went to the area where the murder occurred, and it was very, very helpful, very helpful. And once I did that, in addition to that, we took a video camera with us. Mm-hmm. And what I did was I had the detective who was with me. What we did, I should say, is that we basically walked the path that Zipporah walked, from the point where she got onto the bridge to the point where she was accosted, to the point where she was brought for her where she was murdered, and there was also another little piece of information that we had gotten that indicated that someone had actually witnessed something on the bridge, and we needed to see from his perspective what he could see. So we did that. And I was very, very satisfied now that I had, at least in my head, the foundation for being able to argue what I needed to argue at this trial. So I guess I should talk about the facts. What happened is this Zipporah was, it was around Hanukkah, so it was cold. It was December. And she was a little bit, in her father's, I shouldn't say that, not a father, in her friend's estimation, she felt that she was a little overweight and needed to lose some weight, and she would exercise. And one of the things that she did was walk the Williamsburg Bridge. And it's a good walk, and it was a back and forth from Brooklyn to Delancey Street in Lower Manhattan, back from Delancey Street to Williamsburg, which is where she lived. So this one Sunday morning, she left earlier than usual because she was going to a Hanukkah party that afternoon. So she wanted to get her exercise in. and then get back, clean up, and then get ready for the party. So she starts out on the bridge, and she was bundled up. She had on, a coat, and she had a scarf, which is an important piece of this whole thing. And at some point on the walkway, she encounters a guy who is the defendant in this case, named Raymond Vargas. And Vargas, as I write in the story, in my opinion, after I learned everything about him, was the devil incarnate. I mean, he was a bad dude, let me tell you. And he accosted her. He was a junkie. And he thought that because she was a Jewish girl, young woman, I should say, she had money, must have had money. And he was looking for a fix, looking for money, and he accosted her. And he took her from the walkway of the bridge. And if you picture the bridge has a roadbed. In a little above the roadbed are subway tracks that travel over the bridge, and above that is the walkway, the pedestrian walkway. Below the subway tracks, below the roadbed, was an area that guys who worked on the bridge would use to store paint and tools and things like that. It was called a worker's pan, P-A-N. And it was basically suspended from the bottom of the bridge. And so he grabbed her by this scarf, and he basically dragged her from the walkway, which was up above the roadbed, down a staircase, across the roadbed, and into this area that was just above the worker's pan, and then down a little staircase onto the worker's pan. And she was no match for him. He was a bad guy, a vicious guy, and he was looking for money. Zipporah had no money on her. She was exercising. She was not going to the store. She was not going to school. She was not going out socially. She had nothing on her. And that pissed him off. I mean, that really set him off. And the way that I know some of the things that sound very personal is that he gave a confession to the police. So I know some of this stuff because it came out of his own mouth. He then, when he didn't find the money, he searched her, didn't find the money. He took the scarf and he strangled her, killed her with the scarf. Later, he takes the scarf on his escape and he throws it over the side of the bridge, but not into the water. He throws it onto the side of the bridge where the people who do maintenance for the bridge and for the surrounding area have a kind of a yard, a working yard, and it went into that worker's yard, and it was found later. He then strips her. He doesn't strip her totally at this point. He basically takes her. She's not dead, but he doesn't want this to seem as if it was, a junkie slave for money. He wanted to make it seem as if she was attacked sexually. So he takes her pants off, takes her underwear off, and he forces his fingers and hand into her vagina so that he injures her vagina and injures the area around her. And then he leaves her, just like that. He takes off, dumps the scarf, and here's the little thing that really helped us. One of the things that helped us. When he was going from the worker's pan to the roadbed, he had to cross the area where the cars travel across the road, I guess, and to throw the scarf over the side. It was an early Sunday morning when this happened, and someone saw him. Someone driving from Manhattan to Brooklyn saw the guy come across the road, go to the side of the bridge, and it was described to me as throw something over the bridge. And he was described as a medium-sized Hispanic in terms of height, not very heavy, and dark hair. And that was it. But we at least had something to go on. Now, I told you that the scarf was recovered. And it was later, we later got it back from the workers who found it on the, I guess it was on the ground underneath a car as the wind had blown it, got it later on. So Zipporah now is dead by herself, alone, on this cold winter morning, laying on this worker's pan. No one was going to find that body. No one. She obviously didn't make it home, didn't make it to the party. And hours went by before her family realized that, something is up, and called the police, and they began a search. Now, what happens to Raymond Vargas? What does he do? He's a total junkie, as I said before, always looking for a fix. He had he hooked up with a woman friend of his who he told what he did. And the reason he trusted her so much is because he and she were involved in another homicide that I'll tell you about in a little bit. So she said to him, and you read the story a lot more recent than I did. I forgot her name now.
Sudol. Right?
Yeah.
Last name Sudol. Sudol.
Yeah. Right. She says to him, "Are you crazy? You left that body on the bridge?" And he tried to tell her, "Well, they're going to be looking for a sex offender. That's not me."
Yeah.
He said, No. She said, we got to go back. So Sunday night, they get a can of gasoline and they buy it in a gas station near the bridge. And they climb back up to the bridge, douse Zipporah's body, because it hasn't been found yet, with gasoline, and set her on fire. And she is totally burnt to a crisp. And basically what's left is obviously the charred body, but what's left of her, the things that she had on, or things that was a small little bra clasp, one shoe. That's it. And later on, when I tried the case, I made a big deal of what was left of this vibrant young woman. But the police recovered it once they found the body. And what got them to the body at this point was the fire. It was able to be seen when they got up there. The workers, actually what it was the workers who had been around the bridge saw something and called police. They went up and discovered this totally charred body. Of course, at that point, they had no idea who it was. They knew that there was a young Jewish girl missing, but there was no confirmed identification at that point. So what they had to do was to get the body to the morgue, which they did. And the medical examiner now needed to find a way to identify this young girl, or this body. No fingerprints, of course. No DNA left, because there was nothing left of her. What was left were teeth in her head. And what he did was they suspected, it was pretty much a foregone conclusion by that point that this was Zipporah, but we had no confirmed identification yet. But they then got to her family and started to ask her family about dentists. What dentist did she go to? What dentist had she attended recently, gone to for a visit recently? And it turns out that she had gone to a dentist in a hospital, Beth Israel Hospital, which is in the lower Manhattan on the other side of the Williamsburg Bridge. And sure enough, there were dental records there, obviously, of Zipporah, full set of dental records. And when the ME got them, he compared them to the teeth that were left in the head. And it turns out that that was how we confirmed that it was Zipporah. And now at this point, keep in mind, I am not in the office yet. I all during the time of the crime, time of the investigation, I am in private practice. I hadn't been hired back. So I'm not aware of any of this stuff until I learn it later on when I get the case to try it. And when I tell you that, and I probably didn't let you know this, but the crime actually took place, I would say, almost a year before the ultimate arrest of the defendant. It had taken that long for the investigators to kind of get together and come up with a plan. And even with this plan, even knowing who she was, it took a very strange turn of events in order to arrest this devil, in my opinion. And what it was the gas can helped. The purchase of the gasoline at this gasoline station near the bridge helped. And why do I say that? Before he killed Zipporah, Vargas and Sudol were always looking for a fix. Always. They never had any money. They were thieves. They did whatever they could to get money. And when they ran out of opportunities and places to get money, Vargas went to a person who had helped him for most of his life, which was one of his best friends. And he had always gone there when he needed money. And the guy, who was an older guy, older than him, I don't want to say total senior citizen, but getting close. And he would always help out Vargas. He would always help him. He'd always give him some money, let him stay in his apartment, gave him food. And Vargas would not have survived over the years if not for his best friend who was helping him out. And Sudol was a complete bitch and scumbag. I'm telling you this because she egged them on.
Well, I mean, she was complicit. She's the one that said light it on fire. She wasn't just pulled in by happenstance. She took a crime and was like, let's make it a war crime.
Yep. So it was not terribly surprising to me when I learned that in order to feed their habit, they had gone to this friend of Vargas's, to his apartment, with the idea that they were going to ask him for money. And the guy always gave him money. This time, he put his foot down. He said, no, I'm not giving it to you. I'm done. I'm done helping you. So what did they do? Sudol says, let's fucking kill him. And Vargas says, yeah, let's kill him. And they kill him in his apartment. His best friend, the guy who basically saved his life, killed him and took his wallet. And inside the wallet were all these credit cards. And now keep in mind, again, this is before the murder on the bridge. And what they did in order to get cash, because the credit cards were no good to them, they cut a deal with the gas attendant at the gas station near the bridge. And the deal was this. Use this credit card, go inside, run it through the machine as if I purchased the gas, and as if I purchased, let's say, $20 of gas, right? But they actually had a car, too, and they would use the car. So he would put, let's say, $5 worth of gas into the car, give the guy the credit card. The attendant would go in, run the credit card up for $20, take the $15 out of the till, give some to Vargas and Sudol, and he would keep a little bit himself. And they kept doing that. They kept doing it. So what happened is there came a point when the investigation of the death of Vargas's friend, and I can't remember his name, but when that investigation was handled by the detectives in Brooklyn North Homicide, and They asked around. They figured out that this guy Raymond Vargas was his buddy, that he was a junkie, that and clearly it was, I don't want to say easy, but they got him to be a suspect rather quickly. So what did they do? They realized that the guy had his cards, his wallet stolen, credit cards taken. They checked with this man's family to see if they knew anything about the cards, anything about where the wallet would be. They didn't, but they said that they had heard through the grapevine that his cards were being used at this gas station. So the police went over to the gas station, and sure enough, they figured out through with the attendant, using the attendant, and the attendant, I'm sure, gave up this scheme rather quickly when he learned that there might be a murder involved. And it turns out that he gave up all of the information and gave the information to the cops that it was this guy Vargas who had cut this deal, and they had this scam going where he was running credit cards through the machine, charging the company for more than the actual amount of gas that was being sold. And they were splitting the difference. So now the question was, how do we find Raymond Vargas? What did they do? So it turns out that, Vargas was a street guy, and he was a ghost. He was able to move around without many people finding out where he was. And they learned, however, that he had a girlfriend who was a prostitute. Now, do you remember her name? She was
Red Colon.
Red, yeah.
Red, quote unquote Red. I forget her first name. Her last name was Colon. They called her Red Colon.
Yeah, her name was Red. So she was a prostitute, and the word on the street was that Vargas and she were boyfriend girlfriend. Sudol was not a girlfriend. Sudol was a
partner,
friend who did drugs with him. Now, while the police are investigating the death of his buddy, he kills the girl on the bridge. Right? Now, the cops have no clue that the two deaths are connected in any way. None whatsoever. The death on the bridge is basically dead, unfortunately. They use a pun that's unintended, but it was going nowhere. It was a dead case. So they find Red. And after several attempts to get her to cooperate, she finally tells the cops that she and Vargas are in love, and that he's her man, and that actually he suddenly had needed to leave New York. Of course, she had no idea why. And at that point, he had told her that when initially she didn't know why he needed to leave New York, but then he told her. And he told her that about the killing the little girl on the bridge. Told her also about killing his friend. So Red was a piece of work too. Imagine this guy tells you that he's just killed two people, burnt the shit out of this poor dead woman on the bridge, and you're still going to leave with him and try to, make a life with him. But, that's junkies in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And, but he then came up with this plan about leaving. She got excited about it, but he started treating her like shit. It didn't really,
what a surprise.
He was a junkie.
What a surprise.
Yeah, it's not a surprise.
The guy that burned a 15-year-old girl to death on a bridge turns out to not be Romeo.
So when the police finally get her to talk, she had enough of Raymond Vargas, as you can imagine. And she said, I'm supposed to meet him tonight, because the cops wanted to know where he was. They were going to go arrest him. She said, I don't know, but I'm supposed to meet him at this particular corner in Williamsburg at this particular time. And And that's what I'm going to do. We're going to leave. The cop said, okay, you're going to do that, and we'll take it from there, right? Now, she's in the back seat of a detective car when she's telling him this. And the detective's driving. There's a guy, his partner is in front. She's sitting in the back. And just as an offhanded comment, she says, by the way, what are you guys looking for that killing that little girl on the bridge? The detectives told me later on they literally jammed on the brake of the car and turned around and said, what are you talking about? We're investigating the guy that he killed his best friend. She said, oh, I thought it was the little girl on the bridge because he killed her too. The break in the case. The cops had no idea that they were looking for the same guy for both murders. So now the plan gets put into place. She's supposed to meet him at this particular corner in Williamsburg. And it was going to be that evening, whatever. I don't know. I forgot what time of day it was, but it was daylight still.
Oh, yeah. It was going to be 8 p.m., yeah.
Yeah. So they set it all up, and they drive her. She gets driven to an area near where they were going to pick where she was supposed to meet him. Gets out of the car, and he spots her. Vargas spots her getting out of his car, and clearly he must have known it was a police car. And he takes off, Tommy. He starts running. Now, the detectives who were chasing him were not 20-year-olds. They were not even 30-year-olds. But they now enlist some other uniformed cops to help them out. Anti-crime cops in, not in uniform, but in plain clothes. And there's this now chase through the streets of Brooklyn. The lead detective was the guy who was in the lead, not only in the lead not only had the case, but literally was in the lead of all of these detectives and cops chasing Vargas. And Vargas could run. He was very thin. He was very fast. And the detective tells me later that we almost got him, and then he hops this fence. And he goes into the backyard of a house, and I said, well, what did you do? He says, I couldn't get over the fence. But the young bucks who were with me, that's how he described the cops, they went over the fence like it was nothing. So what'd you do?
Well, your friend also, he was known for wearing top-tier suits, and he didn't
he
didn't want to tear his suit. He was like, well,
exactly.
I was in this Armani suit, and
correct.
And
exactly. So he doesn't go over. The other cops go over the plainclothes. They chase him into this brownstone house, 4 floors, I think. He goes into the apartment building, and the detective goes around to the front. The cops who are chasing him through the yard follow him into the back of the house. And in the meantime, he goes all the way up the stairs. Now, when I was growing up in Brooklyn, one of the things that all of my friends told me, because there were times when you needed to get away from somebody, not cops, but if you had a beef with someone, they were looking for you. It was just a thing. They said, never go to the roof to get away. Never, because you get up on a roof, there's no place to go.
Yeah.
Unless, you're some antelope and you can go from one roof to another, you're stuck.
Fucking Spider-Man.
So you never do that. This guy went into the building, but he was smart. He didn't go to the roof. Cops are all around now in the building. They're on the 4th floor, or I think it was the 4th floor, the top floor of the building. And where the hell is Vargas? What he had done is he had crawled into the crawl space, gotten into the crawl space between the roof and the ceiling of the apartment that was on that floor. And he was making his way through the crawl space to find a way out, or waited out until the cops left. And what happens, he hits a soft spot in that ceiling, and he falls through the ceiling onto the bed of two people who were actually in the process of fucking in their apartment.
And Vargas comes to the ceiling like some satanic criminal felon
Exactly.
Santa Claus.
Well, of course, these two naked people are screaming. The cops are out in the hall. They finally are able to get a hold of him. And they do. And he's now arrested and brought into the precinct. And he gives a statement. When I say a statement, I'm talking about a confession, first to the police, and then to the assistant DA, who was the riding DA. And what a riding DA is there's a DA on call most of the time from the Homicide Bureau, every day of the year, 24 hours, so that if that assistant DA is needed for legal assistance to the police or other law enforcement agencies, or needed to go out and take a formal statement from either a witness or a defendant, he or she is available. So the riding DA was called to the precinct, and Vargas gives a videotaped confession to the entire event, everything, to the killing of his friend, to the killing of Zipporah, that's how I know that he dragged her by the scarf. I know, where he threw the scarf, everything. And it was figured to be an open and shut case. This was a great case. The ADA before me turned the suit all because obviously she was in line to be charged with an accessory to murder, if not acting in concert in a murder, 2 murders. And she gave it up. She became a witness. Red was easy. Red Colon became a witness even before he fell through the roof of through the ceiling of that apartment house in Williamsburg. She wanted nothing to do with this guy. So Red was a witness. Sudol was a witness. We had the confession. And ultimately, I'll skip ahead now, ultimately the case gets tried by one of my colleagues before I got back to the office. And he said to me that the case went in well, but there was an issue with a juror. And I'm not sure what the issue was. I don't know if it was the juror couldn't stay because of
somebody was sick.
Yeah, I think it was something like that, which was terrible because what happens in these cases, Tom, in case your listeners don't know, when the evidence part of a trial, particularly a murder trial, ends, the judge asks the defense attorney, who really has the only important answer or the important choice in this question, as to whether or not the alternate jurors should be kept. And the alternate jurors are there so that if someone on the jury proper of the first 12 gets sick or something happens, then an alternate juror is put into that position, okay? But in order for that to happen, the defense attorney has to give his consent or her consent. In this situation, at the end of the case, the judge asked the defense attorney, do you want me to keep the alternates? And the defense attorney said no. Now, here's the reason for that. Defense attorneys, like anything other than the G word, guilty. A mistrial is great. Mm-hmm. A hung jury is great. An acquittal, of course, is the ultimate. But as long as there's no conviction, then a defense attorney is satisfied. So he or she figures that if one of the jurors gets sick, as in this case, there'll be a mistrial. We try it again. Maybe I get lucky and people don't show up. There's a whole bunch of things that could happen with a second trial. So there was no alternate to put in. So the juror was dismissed. The jury was disbanded. A mistrial was declared. The prosecutor went off to his new job, and Vecchione gets put into the hot seat. And the DA told me himself that this is one of the ones that I need.
Don't fuck it up.
He needed it. Yeah. Don't. Now I have been out of the office for about 10 years at this point. I tried a lot of cases as a defense attorney, I had tried a lot of cases before as a prosecutor, but I hadn't tried a case as a prosecutor in 10 years. Luckily, the judge in the case was a guy that I knew from my years as a prosecutor, my years as a defense attorney. And, I knew that it was not going to be one of these, a judge who was a real prick and give me a hard time with everything. He was okay. Fair, a good judge, but he was not going to give me a hard time. And that kind of made me feel good, maybe at least calm down a bit. But I had to do all of this work to get ready because I knew how important it was. Now, keep in mind, I mentioned to you about this rabbi from the community who had befriended me, if you want to call it befriending, but who had become a liaison to the community. But he was a guy who controlled lots of votes. He was the kind of guy who, if he said no to a candidate, thousands of people in his community would not vote for that guy. So Hines, the DA, who was the guy who was the DA at the time, needed A, to be on the good side of that rabbi, and B, to make sure that he had those votes secure when the next election came up. So this was a big case for him. The rabbi also told me that the people in the community were very, very concerned when there was no conviction. I think they thought that maybe, it was just going to die on the vine. Mm-hmm. So when it didn't, they were now interested in what was going to happen, a great deal of interest. And I got to tell you, Tom, let's see, that was 92. In 2012, that's 10 years later, CBS News did a 6-part series called Brooklyn DA. And it was unprecedented access to things in the office. And my operation, Rackets, and me personally were a big part of the 6-part series. And one of the last episodes was about, they wanted me to go back to Williamsburg to take the viewers through what I'm just taking you through. Mm-hmm. And when I got there with the film crew, there were actually people who remembered me from 10 years before coming up to me and shaking my hand and saying, "You did such a great job. We'll never forget." It was very, very heartwarming. It was unbelievable. I mean, 10 years later, so many things happened in the city. How did I get to remember this? But they did. They did. They said, "We'll never forget what you did for us," that kind of thing. So it was a big deal, and it was a lot of pressure. And I had assigned to me two of the DA's office detective investigators, a guy named Steve Bondor, who became a really good friend of mine, and another guy named Joe Macias. And they were terrific. They were terrific with regard to finding witnesses that were, like Red. We couldn't keep Red. We couldn't lock her up and hold her in custody until the trial. Sudol was in jail. That was easy. But what happened is there came a time when during the trial, and I think I talk about this in the story, but where a letter showed up or a witness showed up who said that I think it was sort of an alibi witness or something of that nature, who was putting a real crimp in the testimony of one of the witnesses. And my detectives were able to discover enough to spell all of the bad she was going to do to this trial if we got to that point. And we had to. I mean, we had to get to trial very quickly now. So we get to trial, and things are going very well. The videotape, I got to tell you, Tom, was so important. When I put that videotape up and the jurors were mesmerized. And the theory behind that, for anybody who, I'm sure that there are people who realize what I was doing. obviously a murder case involves a dead person who can't tell the jury anything about what happened to them, can't set the stage, can't tell them the atmosphere. So you need to do that. You need to be able to put the jury in the place of the person who was murdered. And the way to do that, to me, was this videotape. Because when you saw it, you could see the loneliness, the emptiness, I should say, of the area that this young woman on this early Sunday morning was walking through. I mean, it was even though it was daylight, it was eerie because, who knows about the little nooks and crannies of a bridge, particularly when you're being dragged by some maniac by the scarf that you were using down to an area that you didn't even know existed. And I got to tell you something. Before I went to the bridge and looked and walked the bridge and did the videotape, I crossed that Williamsburg Bridge all the time. I used to try to find in my car, just passing, the workers' pan. I tried to see where I could find. I couldn't find it. It was not visible from the roadbed. So it was a place that was. It was just. It was just a one of the most deserted, loneliest places in New York City because there was nothing there except some tools, some paint cans, and emptiness. And there was, no way to run. If you tried to run in one direction, you fall off and fall into the East River. There was really no place to go. So I can imagine what poor Zipporah was feeling. And then, of course, she winds up getting killed. And, and the idea that her body was, burnt to the crisp was something that when I told the story in the opening statement, I could see jurors were, wincing visibly, and I could tell. And I knew that the videotape was going to go a long way towards hopefully convicting this guy. And it was successful. It really was. It was terrific. I couldn't have asked for a better viewing. I couldn't have asked for a better reaction. I watched the jury while they were watching the tape. And the case went in very well, I thought. I knew there was going to be a defense because in spite of confessing twice to the cops and to an assistant DA, Vargas's defense attorney told me that he is going to testify because the cops forced him into confessing to them, and the ADA came and he just repeated what he told the cops because the cops threatened him and did all kinds of things to him. And now the cops did a couple of things that were very smart, anticipating that this might happen, even though they had gotten confessions. When before and after, and I'm not sure if I put this in the story, but before and after the confession, they had him strip in a room to his underwear. Yeah. And they took pictures.
Make sure there's no bruises from police brutality.
Then after the confession, they had him do exactly the same thing, take the same pictures, and of course it showed that there was no bruising. And so that was his defense. He was going to testify that he was forced into this. The cops made the whole thing up. He repeated everything they said. They fed it all to him. Now, when he got on the stand, Tom, I can tell you, even on direct, there was no way this guy could possibly remember what his name was, never mind remembering an hour-long confession with details the way that he did, unless he was the murderer. So I knew that it would be somewhat, I don't want to say easy, but I think that I cross-examining the guy was going to be a situation where I was able to punch holes in it. But you never know. Could be a juror on there who hates cops. Look at it now. If I tried the case now, there'd be nobody who believes the cops. But back then, even there were a few people who who had problems. And I knew that the cops played a big role in this. So when I was picking the jury, I made sure that I asked questions of the jurors as to whether or not they had problems with police officers, whether they had ever had run-ins with police officers, whether their family or friends had ever had run-ins with police officers, that kind of thing. Because I anticipated that this was going to be what happened. Now, that other red herring that they tried with this witness and I dismissed that rather easily. So Vargas now takes the stand. He testifies. And he gave the jury, looking at the jury like this poor sad sack. I mean, here's a guy who literally killed his best friend. And as you said before, set a young teenage girl on fire. I mean, burnt her beyond recognition. This is not somebody who should be accepted as being, believable by a jury. So he gave him his sob story and told him about how the cops beat him and how the cops forced him and how the cops fed him everything because and this is a product of this is something the defense attorney fed him. This is a case that became important to the community. So the pressure was on to solve the case. Meanwhile, I told you how the case was solved by an offhanded comment by Red Cologne in the back of a radio car, right? The cops didn't know anything about Raymond Vargas until Red said, what she said.
It was like an offhand comment being like, hey, do you want to know who the second shooter was with JFK?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you want to know who's on the grassy knoll, by the way? That was my uncle. You're like, the who?
Exactly. So he now gives this big sob story. And the biggest thing about it, what I was very happy about, was how he told the jurors that the police fed him this hour-long or hour-and-a-half-long confession with details about this, the Jewish girl walking on the bridge, the color of the scarf, all kinds of stuff that there was no way that anybody other than the killer would know. Mm-hmm. So he and one of the other things that he did not mention when he was on the stand, which I had underlined in the confession and was ready for, was the statement that he made to the detectives and to the DA the night he was arrested about it being almost a relief that he was finally arrested because that young girl used to visit him in his dreams every night while he laid in bed. And then later, laid in Rikers Island waiting for the trial, she would come to him in his dreams, and he basically haunted him. And he was happy that, he was finally able to exorcise the demons, but he was not happy because he was not going to exorcise those demons. He was going to now make it difficult for me and everybody else to basically hold him responsible. So he didn't say that during the course of his direct examination. And I was ready. And I'll never forget this, Tom, until the day I die. I'm sitting at the table, the prosecution table, and the defense attorney says, no further questions. So I don't get up right away. I wait. Counted my head, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. I waited about 5 count. And I pushed back very slowly from the table. And he's now all emboldened because he had gotten his story out. He thinks he did well with the jury. And he's ready. He thinks he's ready. And I get up and I say to him, did she come to you last night in your sleep, Raymond? Did you see her last night while you were laying in bed in Rikers Island? Tom, he started to shake on the stand. He was not ready for that. I said, she came to you last night, didn't he? Yet you still told the jury a lie. And then I went from there. And I cross-examined them with the details of the confession. Said, you say the police gave you this? And there were things in there that even the police couldn't know in this deed. Because, again, remember, they were, this arrest at that night when he made the confession, was they were not arresting him initially for that case. So they weren't, not that they weren't ready, but it was different than when you have everything piled up and you kind of bring him into the room and you start asking him questions with all of the files and everything there. Vargas gave them everything. And I said to him, how could the police have known that? Oh, and he couldn't, that kind of thing. And it got to the point where the judge said to me in the middle of this thing, let's take 5 minutes. I sat down, I waited, got back up again after the 5 minutes, and I went back at him. And we continued then probably had him on the stand for about an hour. When I rested, there was no questions from the defense attorney. No questions to rehabilitate him. And we ended for the day. The judge said, we'll come back tomorrow for summations. I went out into the hallway. My colleagues were there from the DA's office. Now, keep in mind, I'm the new guy, right? Nobody really knew me from all these people that I now were colleagues of. They were not there when I was there 8 years before. I was drenched in sweat. I was so hyped up with this thing that I'm not going to lie, it was exhausting. But I'm still remember it now as I talk to you about the look on his face when I started off with that. Did she come to you last night? And ultimately, he gets convicted. And I remember the summation again as if it was yesterday. And I have to tell you, I'm a big college basketball fan. And at the time, the Big East was the league, and they had a tournament in Madison Square Garden in March, and the trial was in March. And I had a couple of days to write my summation, and I knew what I wanted to say. And I had a colleague of mine, an older guy who had been trying cases for a long time. He was a big fan of, I went to St. John's University, and he did too. And St. John's is part of the Big East. And we were watching a game, and I said, we were watching one of the preliminary games. And I said, so he said to me, his name is Tom, coincidentally. Tom said to me, so you ready for the thing? I said, Tom, I got to ask you a question. I said, this is what I want to say. And I told him how I wanted to wrap up the summation. So I said, you think it's too much? He said to me, Mike, you got to give them some red meat. And that's red meat. So that was it. I knew what I wanted to do. And I ended up by saying, essentially, if I'm not getting this in correct order, that Zipporah her family will never see her receive her diploma. Her father will never walk her down the aisle at her wedding. And she will never push a baby carriage through the streets of Williamsburg because of this defendant, Vargas. And I said, basically, when he got through with her, the only thing left of Zipporah was, when I walked to the jury rail with the bra clasp and her shoe, was this bra clasp and this shoe. And I left it on the jury rail. And I sat down. And that was it. The rabbi and her friends were in the audience. They were all crying. All of these young girls who were her friends were crying. I had the jurors who were crying. And the rabbi came up to me afterwards and he said, you honored us. You honored us. And didn't take long for the conviction. We got a conviction. And it was a very satisfying conviction. Now, I got to tell you, going back to Zipporah's father, he never showed up one day at the trial. Never 1 second. To this day, this is now 2021. I tried the case in 92. I've not heard one word from this guy. Never. And
Do you think that's just?
I didn't know, the grief, I guess, was just too much. And
I don't. Yeah, I don't. I mean, not that I have any experience in criminal prosecution, but I feel like if maybe at first it could seem like he doesn't want to talk because it's like, why did this even happen? It's not a safe city. And then maybe at second you could say he's angry because you haven't found the killer. But if it's been 29 years, I mean, I got to imagine it's just got to be overwhelming trauma. Maybe it's just he compartmentalized his mind, put this on the shelf.
I don't fault him at all. I just point that out as being just an anomaly in this whole thing. And of course, after I finish this case, I now have to try him for the killing of his best friend, which I did. I tried that case as well. And we had Sudol again. We had Red again. We had the credit card. By the way, he used his credit cards not only at the gas station. Yeah. He went on shopping sprees through Greenpoint and Williamsburg. There's a big shopping area called Knickerbocker Avenue. This guy went up and down Knickerbocker Avenue buying sneakers. And I'll tell you this is one of the things that it was really kind of strange. Not strange, kind of funny as it happened. Sudol is on the stand. I think it was Sudol. Might have been Red, but it was one of them. And they were talking about. I was asking about the shopping spree, and she was saying, "Yeah, he wanted to buy sneakers. So she looks over the jury, the witness box towards Vargas, and looks down at his feet. She says to me on the stand in front of the jury, "See those sneakers he has on? He bought those with that credit card because they were red sneakers. They were just stuck out like sore thumbs." But that was, it was kind of a clinching moment, and he was convicted. And the guy was convicted 25 to life for the murder on the bridge, 25 to life for the murder of his best friend, to run consecutively, not at the same time. So 2 life sentences. I know, obviously, that people are listening and saying, well, there's only one life you have, but this guy was never getting out of jail. And he's not. He's still in jail. I know that. He's not dead yet either, as far as I know.
Can you start can you explain to me what 25 to life is? Or just like what any 20 to life? What does that mean?
That means that you do not become eligible for parole.
Okay.
Until you do, I think it's 7/8 of the bottom number. That from that point on, you're eligible to go before the parole board to apply for parole to get you out of jail. Son of Sam, for instance. Son of Sam was convicted all of these life sentences, right? Son of Sam, at some point, would go before the parole board, but he, in a lot of ways, never wanted to get out. He never said the right things. Not that anybody was going to parole, Berkowitz and let him out after, he killed all those people. But that's what happens. I'll tell you an interesting story about a client of mine when I was a defense attorney. He was convicted of murder, and he was convicted based on again, I'm sorry to curse, the shittiest evidence I have ever seen in my life. I mean, I've never seen evidence like this before. I had one of the so-called eyewitnesses on the witness stand under cross-examination, and I said, "Do you see the person who was in the room who shot your friend here in court?" She looked around, she looked at the defense table, and she said, No, he's not here. He still got convicted. The judge was not a prosecution-oriented judge. He gave charges that were... Anyway, guy did 33 years in jail. 33 years. And we find out that 33 years later, that the police, as well, not the police, but the prosecutor in the case, hid from me exculpatory evidence that if I had at the time of the trial, he would not have been convicted. He had evidence that 2 other people were arrested the night of the crime that fit the description of the murderers. It was never turned over to me. And even if they had nothing to do with it, that fact alone, in a weak case involving just one identifying witness would have been enough to argue reasonable doubt. My guy didn't do it. I know my guy didn't do it. He wasn't even anywhere near the neighborhood. It took 5 months for the police to arrest him, even though he lived down the block from the precinct. So anyway, my point is that he went to, when he was eligible for parole, he went to the parole board first time, said to them, I didn't do this. Parole denied. Boom. Next time, 2 years later, I didn't do this. I'm innocent. The police hid stuff. The prosecutor hid stuff. Denied. Finally, somebody got him and said, listen, John, you got to say you did this, even though you didn't do it. That's what they want to hear. They want to hear you say that, you know, you did it, that you're remorseful for it. So the next time he went to the parole board, he said that. Guess what happened? They paroled him. And then we started, the case is still obviously out there being investigated as far as the wrongful conviction. There's no way that he would have been convicted had I had the information that they hid from me. The murder occurred, and I'll stop at this point. The murder occurred in a room that was lit by one candle with no other lights. Everybody in the room, they were obviously doing drugs. Everybody in the room, the so-called witnesses, were high on angel dust.
Jesus,
every one of them. And only one of them, after being told later on that you better say this guy did it. And why did he say that he did it? Because he had friend, the guy who actually did it was pushing this witness to say that my client did it because he didn't like him, because they had fought over some girl, you know, before. And he said, say this guy did it, even though he was the one who did it. Now, 33, 36 years later, the shooter says, that guy never did it. Never did it. I only said it because he was, you know, messing around with a girl that I liked. So the parole board, we got around to the story because of the parole board, but the parole situation is less than ideal in New York, less than ideal in any state, you know. And so anyway, Vargas would have to do 25 and then 25 before he's eligible for parole, because you got consecutive sentences. So that's my understanding. Now, things change, Tom, and, you know, if somebody out there is going to say, oh, Vecchione doesn't know what he's talking about, I'm not an expert on, you know, the parole boards. I can tell you what the 25 at the bottom number means in general sense, that he's got to do a portion of that before he's eligible to go to the parole board. So
have you, we'll wrap this up in a minute, but have you, I don't know why I went down this rabbit hole last night. Really not sure why. But I was watching, there's a 10-hour video on YouTube, and it's the interrogation of Nicholas Cruz, the kid that shot up Parkland 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay.
High school in Florida. He killed 17 people, injured 17 more. And the interrogation is it's like that afternoon. So like the murders were that morning.
Right.
And I mean, the whole thing is obviously insane, but just stripping away all of that, as someone that doesn't know anyone that was killed in Parkland, just, you know, let's call what it is. I'm removed from it. I'm emotionally removed. It's bad, but I'm emotionally removed from it, just watching this 3 years later in my bed like a psychopath. But I'm watching the video. The one thing that struck me was how professional the police investigator was. I mean, he's a guy, you know, he's like, I'm not a, you know, the kid asked him, he's like, are you a psychologist? He's like, no, I'm a 52-year-old father. I've raised 3 kids. So I'm kind of like a psychologist. Just kind of, you know, whatever. But I was just thinking, like, that's a guy that's raised 3 kids, and he's talking to this kid that just shot 17 kids dead in their school. And this doesn't really have anything to do with your story, but more so just in criminal prosecution. The insane ability of that guy to just, I mean, granted the kid's handcuffed and his feet are his feet are handcuffed to like a metal ring in the floor. But he just kind of sat there and talked to him in the most professional manner. And I couldn't help but think, like, despite all of our shortcomings as a country, as a species, there was something, loosely, there's something beautiful about a justice system that isn't a mob of angry people burning someone alive, but rather this kid, despite killing 17 other kids, is still brought to a room with a microphone and a camera and a prosecutor who reads him his rights and then just talks to him, and he's like, let's talk about the events of today. And then, when the kid starts like freaking out, he's like, relax, let's just start. Is this your name? Is this where you went to school? And there was, it's kind of like the Mossad when they went and captured Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust. They went and captured him in Argentina, and they didn't go and kill him. They captured him. They snuck him out of the country. They brought him to, I think, Jerusalem to be on trial, and none of the guards guarding him could have any family members that were killed in the Holocaust because they didn't want some vigilante justice.
Kill him, yeah.
And it was even that. I was just, there's something about it that's like the restraint. It's the restraint, but it's also, I guess, the honor of the reverence of a justice system that you have to have this thing. Even this guy that architected the Holocaust, even Nicholas Cruz, who shot 17 kids dead, there's still something about, they give him a glass of water, you want any food, you want any, no, you good, are you handcuffs too tight, no, okay, let's start recording, you have the right to remain silent. And I was just like, for all the evil in the world, because it's anyone can point out what's wrong with the world. It doesn't take anyone special. Anyone can say what's wrong. I don't know. I thought it was very interesting, and that they get that fair shake.
Yes, and you know what the cops have said to me, and I know this. I mean, because I feel the same way. I've done a lot of those interrogations. Is that the last thing you want to do is to become just like them?
Yes.
If you stoop to that level, then you basically are giving up your humanity, in my opinion, and you become exactly like the horror that's sitting in front of you. And it's not the way that people who are educated and civil and not even educated, just civil, operate. They don't. And it's and there are times, I got to tell you, Tom, that I have sat in rooms, with detectives and watched them, and I have been there they've been there when I've gotten confessions, and there are times when you literally want to go across the table, and strangle the person that you.
I'm sure.
But you don't do that. That's not what you do, because again, I would become that person, and you don't. And there is the criminal justice system works. It doesn't work. It's not perfect. It never was. It is never going to be perfect.
It can't be.
But it's the best system on earth, in my opinion, as far as the way things go. And that by and large, most of the time, you get it right. You get it right.
Yeah.
And look, I don't remember if did we talk about when we talked about Crooked Brooklyn, did we talk about the killing of a woman named Amy Watkins? Did I tell you about that? She was a social worker who lived on a dark street in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Did we discuss that in one of the podcasts?
Yeah.
That I was watching that interrogation because I was going to try the case, so I couldn't take the confession because then I would make myself a witness. Mm-hmm. And I remember the detectives, after a year, it was a year from the time that she was killed until they made an arrest. And it was an arrest made because a friend had given the guy up. Finally, she had had enough. She was looking for help on another case, which is the way cops solve cases all the time. But the cops were, knew what kind of person she was, Amy was, what the loss was, what it meant to the city. at the time that it happened, and it was horrendous. This woman died over a pocketbook, her purse that had like $9 in it. And the killing was so horrendous that the stabber, she was stabbed to death, drove the knife all the way through her body. From the back, the tip of it came out just below her breast and the front of her. That's how vicious it was. And your blood boils when you think about it, but you have to be professional and sit there and take the confession and realize that this is something that you're going to deal with later on at a trial the way it's supposed to be dealt with. You're not in a precinct where you take a rubber hose to somebody and beat the shit out of them and say, okay, now I've gotten justice. That's not justice.
Yeah.
That's vigilante. And you're as bad as the person who you're doing it to. So, but there are cases where, where you have to, cops are restrained because of what they've done. There are so many of these things in terms of confessions, and maybe another time I'll come back and we can talk about, about confessions
absolutely
and interrogations, because I've done a lot of them, and there are some cases that turn on a confession. Like this case with the murder on the bridge. Look, it was going to be a walk in the park, right? The guy confessed it to, and then suddenly, without, not knowing that he was going to do this, he decides to now put it on the cops and on the prosecutor who took the confession, and say that they forced him, they fed everything to him, and so what went on and what goes on in that room is very important, because if the defendant makes those kinds of claims, you don't want to have anything that the defense attorney can latch on and say, did you see that thing that happened in the corner? That's what was going on, but they don't want you to see it on the videotape. You can't do any of that. You can't have it at all. I'll tell you, next time I'll tell you about a case that I had with a cop who was killed off duty, and a tragedy. A cop who grew up in the projects in Brooklyn. He was a hero to the people who he lived with, who he lived among, who he grew up with, and who he was now assigned to protect. And he was killed over someone wanted to steal his motorcycle. And the case, I won't get into it now, but we'll save it for another time. Sure. And I'll tell you, and it has to, and the key was a confession. And what happened later on, even in spite of the confession, was something that was unexpected to me. But anyway, I'll leave it. I'll save it for another episode.
Sure. Yeah, that would be an awesome.
Yeah, we can talk about confessions in cases where confessions. I have a few of them. So
I'm wringing you dry like a sponge, Mike. I'm going to get every story out of you over the years before this. I'm going to drain it out of you. That's what I do.
Then ultimately, Tom, we're going to have to talk about the book when the book comes out. So
I know, and it hasn't come out yet. It hasn't.
No. They're talking about end of the summer, early fall. So
man, excuses. Yeah. Get cracking. I was going to say it is. I look at, I've never had jury duty, and I understand the kind of the stereotype or the like, oh, motherfucker, I got jury duty. But like, all things considered, I mean, there is something special about, like, aside from the running water and the electricity, like, these are all great advancements, and it's hard drives and a MacBook, and we're talking at light speed. But like, socially, there's something special that you do get a fair shake, that they're going to grab random members from society. They're going to make sure they're not biased. And it's like, sure, at face value, it's like, oh, it's fucking jury duty. I got shit to do. I can't waste. But when you just kind of move from, like, it used to be we just killed each other, like, out west, or like we literally, like, knuckle draggers in, like, the jungles would just murder each other because you took my apple. I mean, I think that something like jury duty or a fair trial or the justice system, I think it's on par with, like, putting rovers on Mars in terms of how long it took to get to where this is, to where not only does it exist, but it's the norm, and it is what is expected. There's something special about that, and I think it's badass that that's what you've dedicated your life to doing. Like you said in your story, you know, it might be corny, but, you know, I like wearing the white hat. I like chasing down the bag. I don't think that's corny at all, man. I think it's as badass as a guy going to the moon. You're pushing the envelope. We're coming from a time where we would boil people alive because we thought they were witches, because maybe, you know, maybe they were good at sewing, and we're like, they must be a witch. That's
or they dunked them into a lake and said, okay, well, if
you drown, you're innocent.
She's drowned, she's not a witch.
Yeah, so, and but that was a real thing. Like, just like putting leeches on people or excising demons. I mean, that was justice. Was, you know, she drowned, innocent. And it's like, and everyone was just like, I concur, innocent. And it's like, now we're at a time where it's like, they read you your rights. You can get an attorney. If you can't afford an attorney, one will be a lot of, and it's like, that's, you know, I do think that's on par with like an iPhone 12. It's like the social equivalent. So I think it's badass that you put your life to that, man.
Well, thank you very much. I miss it. I enjoy talking about it, and you know, I hope that people enjoy listening to the stories, because
I know they do. I know that.
Good.
Hey, I wouldn't keep having you back on if I didn't like talking to you, Mike.
I figured that, but I didn't want to be so presumptuous as to think that was the case.
No. No, there's no facade with me. I have on those I want to have back on. However, a side note, I have been thinking, there are some guests that I haven't had back on that I would like to have back on. I just haven't reached out to them. But I always tell people, I'm like, I only have you back on if I like you. There might be a guest out there listening that's like, well, why hasn't he had me back on? And I haven't had any guests yet that I don't like. So I've been meaning to say this on an episode. If there's any guests listening and I haven't had you back on, it's probably just a coincidence. So, but you know,
I'm sure it is.
It is. Yeah. There's no, I don't know where the fuck I'm going now. I'm just rambling. Mike Vecchione, thank you so much, sir. Thank you for everything you do. I mean, granted, I don't live in New York, but I figure New York is intertwined in the same nation I live in. So in that sense, you have had an impact on my life. So thank you, sir. And
thank you, Tom.
Thank you
Thanks
for your time.
Having me.
Yeah, man. Thank you for your stories. Crooked Brooklyn, friends of the family, Hand of the Killer, Murder on the Bridge. I'll put all those in the description, and your new book will be out later this summer or this fall. But before that, we'll definitely do another one on confessions. I'll text you. We'll set up an episode.
Terrific. Good to see you.
You too.
Take care of yourself. Hopefully you're getting better, and I'll see you next time.
All right, Mike. Take it easy, buddy.
Okay, buddy. Take care, man.
Yeah, man. Peace.